Welcome. My name is Lily Talcott, and I am the Deputy Superintendent for the Ithaca City School District.
And I'm Amanda Verba. I'm the Chief Operations Officer for the district.
Today we are going to go through our Sexual Harassment and Dignity for All Students Act and safety training that's required by New York State law.
So Lily and I will give you an overview of all of those topics, and then afterward you'll be debriefing with your building level leaders. And if you have any follow-up questions after that, you are always welcome to contact us.
Very good. Let's get started. To begin, you have the right to experience a sexual harassment-free workplace. So what is sexual harassment? Sexual harassment includes harassment on the basis of sex, sexual orientation, self-identified or perceived sex, gender expression, gender identity, and the status of being transgender. Sexual harassment includes unwelcome conduct, which is either of a sexual nature or which is directed at an individual because of that individual's sex when such conduct has the purpose or effect of unreasonably interfering with an individual's work performance or creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment, even if the reporting individual is not the intended target of the sexual harassment. Such conduct is made either explicitly or implicitly a term or condition of employment, or submission to or rejection of such conduct is used as the basis for employment decisions affecting an individual's employment. It's important to note that the current standard has been that sexual harassment needs to be severe and pervasive. Now, any type of conduct based on a protected characteristic that rises above the level of petty slights or trivial inconveniences is now considered sexual harassment. So what are the types of sexual harassment? Well, there's a hostile work environment, so that's sexual or discriminatory displays or publications anywhere in the workplace. That could be pictures, posters, calendars, graffiti, objects, promotional material, reading materials, and it also includes anything that is on your device. It also includes unwelcome advances or statements and hostile actions taken against an individual because of that individual's sex, such as rape, sexual battery, molestation, or attempts to commit these assaults, or physical acts of a sexual nature, including but not limited to things like touching, pinching, patting, grabbing, kissing, hugging, brushing up against, or poking another employee's body. The other form of sexual harassment is quid pro quo. Quid pro quo is a legal term for trade, and that occurs when a person in authority trades or tries to trade job benefits for sexual favors. Who can be the target? A colleague, a supervisor, subordinate, third-party individual. They can be targets or perpetrators. When can it happen? Anytime you're fulfilling work-related responsibilities. So that could be during the workday or even an extension of the workday with something like an after-hours party where everyone is invited, or a conference, and where any place you are fulfilling work-related responsibilities and electronically. So this can occur over text message, phone call, email, etc. What about sex stereotyping? So this is conduct or personality traits that are considered inappropriate simply because they may not conform to other people's ideas or perceptions about how individuals of either sex should act or look. Harassing a person because that person does not conform to gender stereotypes as to appropriate looks, speech, personality, or lifestyle is sexual harassment. And harassment because someone is performing a job that is usually performed or was performed in the past, mostly by persons of a different sex. That's also sex discrimination. Retaliation. Employees are protected from retaliation for making a complaint, reporting sexual harassment not as the target, filing a formal complaint, opposing discrimination in general, assisting another employee who is making a complaint, or providing information during an investigation. Supervisors are held to a high standard of conduct and must report all forms of sexual harassment. They are responsible for any sexual harassment that they should have known of, and they need to handle it with reasonable care. Supervisors are also expected to model appropriate behavior. Supervisors need to know of any kind of sexual harassment, even if no one is objecting to it as well. So what should you do if you are harassed? ICSD strongly encourages you to report it to a supervisor immediately. You can do this in any way that works for you. So any informal means, by calling, emailing, in person, etc. And then we also have a formal complaint system. There's a form in policy 9110.3, and you can send that to your supervisor or human resources. You don't have to be absolutely certain whether the behavior is in violation of the law, and it may not seem to you that's in violation of the law, but indeed it may be violating our policy. If you believe at any point that a supervisor is not taking appropriate action or is not taking it seriously, report it to the superintendent, the DHR, or the EEOC. And those are outlined again in our policy. What should you do if you witness harassment? Again, this is something that we strongly encourage you to report to a supervisor as soon as possible. Again, it can be through informal means or formal means. Let's be clear, we all need to take responsibility for ensuring a sexual harassment-free workplace. Now let's get into a few case studies. So here's an example. Jim is an employee who shares an office with some others. He brought in a company's calendar featuring scantily clad women. He posts it in his office. Meanwhile, I'm going to back up. All of the case studies that we are sharing are all real examples from other school districts. So is this sexual harassment? True or false? Well, it is true. It is indeed sexual harassment, and Jim needs to take down that poster immediately. Another case study. Leanne's coworker, Ralph, has just been through a divorce. He drops comments on a few occasions that he's lonely and needs to find a new girlfriend. Leanne and Ralph have been friendly in the past and have had lunch together on many occasions. Ralph asks Leanne to go on a date with him, dinner and a movie. Leanne likes Ralph and agrees to go out with him. She enjoys her date with Ralph, but decides that a relationship is not a good idea. She thanks Ralph for a nice time, but explains that she does not want to have a relationship with him. Ralph waits 2 weeks and starts pressuring Leanne for more dates. She refuses, but Ralph does not stop. He keeps asking her to go out with him. Sexual harassment, true or false? This is also true. Some folks may think that this is false because she initially agreed to go out on a date with him. However, his persistence is not acceptable. Another case study. Douglas, who has been a principal for the last 15 years, is 60 years old and very kind and warm-hearted. He is very fatherly toward the younger teachers. He frequently tells the young women how pretty they are and how much he looks forward to seeing them. He often greets the young ladies by calling them dear and sometimes hugs them or puts a hand on their shoulder. Before hugging an employee, he usually asks if they have any objection. His hugs always appear fatherly, and he never touches women in inappropriate places. Sexual harassment, true or false? Again, this is true. Let's take this case study a little bit further. Tiara was recently hired as an ENL teacher in Douglas's school. When he sees her, Douglas always asks if he can give her a hug and tells her that her radiant smile brightens his day. Tiara never tells Douglas not to hug her, but just smiles when he asks, which he apparently interprets as consent. You are Tiara's colleague. Having witnessed Douglas and Tiara interact, it is clear to you that Tiara is very uncomfortable with his hugs and compliments. What should you do? As someone who is witnessing this, you should report it. Listen, there are lots of other ways to say no to sexual harassment other than saying no outright, right? It's avoiding the harasser, the harassing situation, avoiding eye contact or conversation, smiling but quickly changing the topic, grimacing and walking away, giving a disapproving look, ignoring comments or pretending not to hear, not laughing at jokes, or jokingly criticizing the conduct.
Thank you, Lily. And again, we recommend that the dialogue that will occur after this training is going to be very valuable because we'll take into account the culture of your building as well as the norms that we're trying to establish across the district. Sexual harassment law is both for the employees, the employer, and for the students as well. We're going to be moving on now to a student-based law, which is the Dignity Act. Although the principles covered under the Dignity Act are also pretty important in the terms of the climate that we create for all staff that come to our school. So as many of you know, the Dignity Act was established in 2012, and it was to create a safe and supportive school climate where students can learn and focus and not fear for discrimination or harassment or being bullied. And it's a very real situation for a number of young people. And when the law was established, they realized that there were some gaps in that law in 2012. They didn't take into account some of the items that would occur outside of school that affect the school day, such as cyberbullying. They also didn't take into account or strengthen the language enough to discuss gender identity and expression, which is the newest change to the law. The Dignity Act really addresses protected classes, but it also, if you notice on that final column on the right-hand side, this other category. So take a moment and look at the protected classes that are outright in the Dignity Act. The other category are things, most importantly here in Ithaca City School District that we see, things like socioeconomic status, right? Young people who come in who may not have what others have, and it's noticeable, and they're therefore bullied or teased or discriminated against. That gender piece on that right column as well was that part that was just updated by commissioners' regulations. We as a district will be working on that through our code of conduct to ensure that there's not gender bias in terms of our dress code enforcement, as well as the way that we utilize School Tool to be able to allow young people to use the names that they choose to use based on their gender identity. Under the law, they use the term material incident, which describes a moment of disruption that is so severe that it interferes with a young person's ability to learn. As you can see, it can be one moment or it can be a series of moments. It's where a student is discriminated against or harassed or bullied. It can be by another student or any school employee. It can create a hostile environment, which can be physical, verbal, even sometimes just by looks, intonation, intimidation, or abuse. The law also goes on to state that it has to be pervasive enough that it would affect or unreasonably and substantially the student's educational performance, opportunities, or benefits, or their mental, emotional, or physical well-being. If a student reasonably or would reasonably be expected to have fear for their physical safety. If a student would reasonably be expected to actually have physical injury or emotional harm. And remember that this can occur off school property and therefore risk the disruption within the school environment, which again is very difficult for anyone to be able to attend and learn and grow in our buildings. The Dignity Act has certain requirements for the district, which is that we have a very strong policy in place. We also have to alert families and staff who the Dignity Act coordinators are. In all of your buildings, that is typically your building level principal or your assistant or associate principals. The Dignity Act also requires items from staff. One of them is instruction on character education, as well as instruction about the rights of students. You also have a reporting requirement. Staff receive information about bullying and harassment and discrimination in many ways. It can be direct, that you're seeing it and witnessing it. It can be that it is reported to you, either verbally or in an email, or that you even might see it, especially on social media. Any of those opportunities where you gather that information about an unsafe experience in the school that is occurring for your students, it is required by law that you report that incident within one school day to your principal, your superintendent, or their designee. After that oral report, it is required of you to write up the situation as best to your ability within 2 school days. That can be done via an official Dignity Act reporting form, which can be found on our website, or in a simple email. I'm going to give you a moment to just take a peek at this slide so that you can get a sense of how either an investigation that you might conduct yourself or that the Dignity Act coordinator for your building might follow. As you can see, oftentimes an investigation leads to either an unfounded episode, although it still may be very serious, a founded episode which in fact did prove that there was discrimination, harassment, or bullying, and also founded a material which would meet the Dignity Act criteria of harassment rooted in a protected class. Obviously, all these investigations are best done with a team approach. Oftentimes that is because we have wonderful relationships with lots of people involved in these situations, and we're able to work together in a solution-based focus, as well as a very therapeutic and kind process for gathering information. We recommend that any of your mental health providers and professionals in the school districts and the buildings be involved with this as well, because oftentimes they have a lot of information about families and past histories of young people and are very helpful in helping to round out that information. Interviews, they're not interrogations. They often have to feel like this is a very safe space. We want people to know that they're able to share information and that we're able to keep that information confidential unless it is something that needs to be shared either upward with our legal team or with a court situation, which is very rare. We would do these interviews separately. This is not a time to try to bring together an aggressor and a target and try to mediate that. This is really about information gathering. It is done in a very calm, with no assumptions approach, so that you can gather data. What was said, what was done, what was the intention, is there a past history, what might be the impact or the perceived impact, and try to capture all of the vantage points of everybody that might be involved. We use that word perceived because that is also very important. Many times we as adults naturally filter items and we say, well, maybe that just was something that was being painted as a bigger picture than it really was. The perception really is allowed by the target, the aggressor, the bystanders, the upstanders, and anyone that comes to you to report. So please don't think that you have to determine if this is truly a major issue that was founded. That is not your job. Your job is to just gather the data. After an interview and upon our decision of whether it's founded, unfounded, did it achieve the requirements under the Dignity Act law, those are really the points that will lead us to how we manage that data, but we take all of these responses seriously, whether they meet the threshold of Dignity Act or not. So we're always looking for the most effective approaches when we're delivering consequences to those that were aggressors, resources for those that were the targets, and even the bystanders, and also follow-up with all involved. And when we say follow-up for all involved, we mean the students themselves, the families and caregivers of those students, and especially you, the staff. We really want to make sure that we close that communication loop so that if you did report something upward to the Dignity Act coordinator, either in your building or the district level, that you are kept into the loop so that you can be part of the solutions as well as part of the reporting. And again, there's lots of information here on this slide about how to most effectively work with DASA incidences. We think about the student's age and developmentally appropriateness of the conduct, and therefore our responses and our interventions would apply. We think about the offenses themselves. We think about prior behaviors and any reports that we might have, and also the status of that student, whether it be due to disability or even just the way that they're progressing through their social and emotional growth. In terms of the resources for the target, we also want to think about what they might need. Is there a safety plan that needs to be in place? Do they need support either through skill building, friendship building, connection to peers or adults? And then finally, again, that follow-up. We want to make sure that throughout this entire process, no one feels that they are left out in terms of the information that we can legally provide to them. We've included this slide, and I'd like to thank the TST BOCES team for putting this together from some research that they found. We like to actually have this printed somewhere near our computers or phones, oftentimes when we're receiving phone calls about some potential Dignity Act issues. As we all know, there are times when we have interactions with others that feel uncomfortable. That doesn't necessarily mean that it might be bullying or harassment or intimidation. And we have found that sort of these 4 tiers of thinking about the behavior between individuals, specifically students, might sort of be categorized. Sometimes young people feel uncomfortable even though it is just conflict. Sometimes there are people who come and they're not their best selves, and they might be rude or mean. And sometimes we do see behaviors escalating to the bullying, harassment, or intimidation realm. All of these things are serious. All of them are dealt with sometimes similarly, a lot of times differently, because obviously the level of intensity grows as the column height grows as well. I'd like to end with just a few tips for you, and I'll give you a minute to just sort of look at these circles here. The most important thing that we want to remember in dealing with any kinds of issues with bullying, harassment, or intimidation is that we pay attention to the details. We're student-centered. We are consistent with our messaging, that we create a space where people can come to us and speak to us, and they know that we're not going to ignore it. We're going to have responses that are caring and that are going to build on our climate so that all people are invested in creating a culture where everyone feels that they matter.
Thank you, Amanda. For the 2019-20 school year, we're really focusing on enhancing communication and safety procedures in all of Ithaca schools. Prevention of emergency situations, including those violent incidents, is really our primary focus, and we have put in place many systems like safety inspections and the ruler rollout to address these areas. However, no program or procedure is a substitute for building those really strong, great relationships with students and families. This year, you'll receive this new card for emergency response for what are designated as shell emergency situations. Shell stands for shelter in place, hold in place, evacuate, lock out, and lock down. Shelter in place refers to situations where there's a need to protect people from severe weather or other unsafe conditions outside of the school building. A hold in place would be used to limit movement inside the building, for example, if there's a medical emergency or a fight. Evacuate is the term that's used most often when one hears a fire alarm, but it can also refer to other emergencies requiring the building to be vacated. Lockout refers to a situation where a dangerous situation is outside of the school building, like a rabid animal or a crime in the area. Movement inside of the building won't typically be restricted, but outdoor activity would be suspended during a lockout. Lockdowns are situations where a threat of violence inside the building is imminent, and for everyone's protection and safety, securing the spaces within the building by rapidly closing and securing all doors and getting out of sight is the safest course of action. Remember, anyone can call a lockdown if needed. Please look over and become familiar with these terms and other emergency procedures. The card should be posted in rooms within the school building so they can be used as quick reference for yourself and others in emergencies. If at any point you have questions, please ask your principal or director or somebody on your Safe Schools team. We practice these procedures regularly to determine whether our plans need to be clarified or changed. So your full cooperation and participation in drills is important. You should expect at minimum 8 fire or evacuation drills and 4 lockdown drills during the school year. One additional enhancement to our safety communication system that we are rolling out this year, district-wide, is Navigate Prepared. This technology will network the Ithaca City School District and connect staff with each other and help to account for students and staff in emergency situations. Remember that safety is everyone's responsibility, and in our culture of love, looking out for each other is the most important thing we can do. This brings me to my last point. The mental health of everyone is necessary for a safe and healthy educational and work environment. Your principal or supervisor can share resources that support this through our school mental health personnel and the employee assistance program. Please let someone know if you or someone in our organization needs support. We are here for you. Thank you very much, and have a great day.